Gideon Marsh had grown so accustomed to solitude that the sound of footsteps on his dirt path stopped him mid-swing, his axe hovering in the air. He turned slowly, eyes narrowing at the sight of 7 women approaching like they belonged there. Their dresses were faded and dusty from travel, but their expressions were focused, determined. The tallest among them, a woman with auburn hair pulled tightly back, stepped forward and looked him dead in the eye. "We're here to milk your cows," she said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Gideon stood still, axe frozen, in his grip, watching them spread out across his yard like they'd rehearsed it. The youngest girl couldn't have been more than 16, holding a pail in her hands like it was her lifeline. The eldest among them moved with a steady, practiced ease, each motion deliberate and efficient, like she didn't have energy to waste. What unsettled him most wasn't their sudden arrival or their strange declaration. It was how they looked at him, not with curiosity or caution, but with familiarity, like they'd always known he'd be standing here. "Mum, I don't know what you're after," he said, his voice hoarse from disuse, "but this is my land. You've got no right here." His tone came out harsher than he meant. After months of speaking only to livestock, his voice felt foreign, words slow to form. Still, the auburn-haired woman didn't flinch. Instead, she gestured toward the pasture where his cows lingered near the barn. "They need to be milked twice a day, judging from the looks of them. You've been letting them go too long." She wasn't wrong. He'd been struggling to keep up, and milking had always been his weakest point. His hands were too large, too rough. The cows had been producing less, their udders often swollen and tender by nightfall. Another woman, perhaps in her 50s, stepped forward and calmly took the pail from the youngest girl's hands. Her fingers were rough and weathered, her movements instinctive. "We've been doing this longer than you've been alive," she said, her voice laced with a kind of knowing that scraped against something buried deep inside him. Gideon wanted to tell them to leave, to send them back down the path and retreat into the silence that had become his world these past 3 years. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the youngest girl's eyes. There was something familiar in them, something that made his heart thud with the ache of memory. Or maybe it was the way the tall woman's voice carried that same defiant edge he remembered from a lifetime ago. "Wait," he called out, voice louder now, carried by instinct more than confidence. The women paused mid-step and turned to face him. Some looked patient, others mildly irritated, but all of them seemed unbothered by his resistance. "No one touches my animals until I know who you are and what you really want," he said firmly. The auburn-haired woman gave a soft smile, but there was something buried in that smile, something hidden, waiting, a truth he hadn't prepared himself for. "My name is Clarabelle," she said, her voice solid, calm. "And these women, their family." She turned to the others, motioning gently as they looked at Gideon with focused, penetrating gazes. "Your family," she added. The axe slipped from his hand and thudded against the dry earth. The sound oddly loud in the sudden quiet. The word struck him like a hammer. Family. He hadn't heard it in years. He'd walked away from them all, cut every tie, set fire to every bridge behind him, because the pain of staying had felt too sharp, too consuming. "That can't be true," he said. But even as the words came, he began noticing the signs. The set of Clarabelle's jaw, his own reflected back at him, the nervous shift of the young girl's weight, a mirror of how his sister used to fidget, the familiar shade of brown in their eyes, an unmistakable trait passed through generations of their bloodline. Clarabelle stepped closer. In the fading light, he saw at the faint scar that ran from her temple to her cheek. "Remember this?" she asked, touching the mark. "You pushed me off the hayloft when I was 12. Told me I was too little to play with the older kids." The memory came back in a rush. Clarabelle, his cousin, his aunt's daughter, the little girl who followed him everywhere, who worshipped him, who he'd hurt trying to keep his distance. She'd fallen from the loft trying to prove she belonged, and the guilt had never truly left him. "Clara," he breathed, tasting the name like it was something he wasn't supposed to say anymore. "How did you find me? Why now?" The questions poured out, clumsy and too fast after so much silence. "We found you because we needed to," said the silver-haired woman with the limp, her voice heavy with meaning. She paused, glanced toward Clarabelle, as if asking silently whether to say more. But Clarabelle was already turning, walking toward the barn with quiet determination. "We'll explain everything," she said without looking back. "But right now, those cows need attention." Then she paused and turned, meeting his gaze once more. "You can hear the story while we work." Shoulder tense and eyes flickering with something softer, the tall woman gave a look that hinted at the girl she once was. "Unless you want your cows to suffer while we jaw about old times," she said, her voice slicing through the morning air. Without waiting for a reply, the other women fell into motion, striding toward the barn like they had every right to be there. Gideon followed instinctively, mind spinning, heart pounding. He barely recognized the faces, yet they tugged at the edges of memory. Was that the youngest girl? Could that be Mercy? His sister Sarah's daughter. The child had barely been walking the last time he'd seen her. One of the women, limping slightly, caught his eye to her profile, pulled at something buried deep in his memory, painful and sharp like a fishhook. But before he could place her, Clarabelle turned at the barn door. Her voice was steady, but the expression on her face made his stomach twist. "Cousin," she said, "you deserve to know the real reason we came. It won't be easy to hear." Gideon felt a chill crawl down his spine. Her tone was the same one she used when, as children, she was about to confess to breaking something important. Inside the barn, the women moved like they'd been born in the place. Their actions were practiced, seamless. Gideon stood back, feeling like a stranger in his own barn. Clarabelle crouched beside Bessie, his most ornery cow, notorious for kicking anyone who got too close. Yet the animal stayed calm under Clarabelle's touch, as if recognizing the gentleness in her hands. While the milk began its soft rhythm into the pail, Clarabelle spoke quietly, without lifting her head. "Your sister, Sarah, she's gone. Fever. Took her last winter." Gideon reeled. Sarah, his little sister, the one who always stood by him, even when he was in the wrong, the one who'd begged him not to go. He saw her again, standing in the doorway, tears in her eyes as he rode away, and never looked back. Now she was gone. The sound of milk hitting the pail echoed unnaturally loud in the silence that followed. "Before she passed," said another woman, this one older, with silver streaks threading her hair, "she made us promise we'd find you, that you had to know about Mercy." She nodded toward the girl standing near the barn entrance, hugging a folded shawl to her chest like it was a shield. Gideon finally looked at her, really looked, and what he saw made his legs unsteady. Sarah's eyes, Sarah's chin, that stubborn tilt of the hip she always used when trying to look braver than she felt. "She's yours to care for now," Clarabelle said gently, locking eyes with him. "Your niece. She's 15. She's been working herself sick just to survive since her mama passed." Gideon barely managed to whisper, "What happened to the farm?" "I sold it," Mercy said, her voice catching. "To pay for Mama's medicine. Didn't help though, not in the end." Her voice cracked, and the words seemed to pull every last ounce of strength from her. Tears tracked silently down her cheeks, leaving clean lines through the dust. "Mama always said you were the best man she knew," Mercy continued, barely louder than the rustle of hay. "Even if you were too stubborn to believe it." Gideon felt something break inside him. The walls he'd spent years building collapsed in an instant. He'd left after the blowout with their father, left to avoid choosing sides in a war that had ripped their family apart. But he never meant for Sarah to pay the price for his escape. "Where have you all been staying?" he asked, unsure he could bear the answer. "Wherever we could," answered the silver-haired woman. "Mercy's been passed around between distant kin. We've all been surviving as best we can." Clarabelle stood then, brushing dust from her skirt. Her eyes met his, unflinching. "That's why we're here, Gideon. We didn't come just to milk your cows. We came to ask if you still have room in your life for family." Before he could speak, hoof beats echoed through the valley, fast and sure. Clarabelle's face drained of color. She stepped away from the door. "Move," she hissed, away from the door. But it was already too late. 3 men had crested the ridge and were riding down fast from the barn. Gideon could clearly see the set of their jaws, the way their hands hovered near their belts. Trouble. The leader was a towering man with a thick beard and hard, storm-gray eyes, "That's Tobias Kane," the limping woman whispered. Her voice trembled. The name hit Gideon like a slap. Kane. A man wrapped in legend and menace. He'd heard the stories how Kane controlled half the territory's trade. How he dealt in debts, paid in blood, ruthless, merciless. "What does he want with you?" Gideon asked. "Sarah borrowed from him," Mercy said, her voice shaking, "to buy medicine. After she died, he said the debt passed on to us, said family pays what family owes." Her arms tightened around herself. "He's been hunting us down, one by one. Said we gotta work it off." The horses grew louder. Clarabelle leaned to the barn wall and peeked out through a gap in the boards. "He doesn't mean real work," she said bitterly. "He means his kind of work." She didn't finish, but the fury in her clenched fists told the story. Gideon felt something shift in him. He'd buried his violence long ago, along with the rage that once made him dangerous, but now watching. His knees shrank back in fear, hearing Kane's boots in the dirt. Something cold and primal stirred deep in his gut. "How much?" he asked sharply, turning toward the hidden rifle rack. 300, Clarabelle answered. "Plus interest. It goes up every day we're not in his hands." $300, a mountain of money for women like them. Gideon didn't have it, not even half, and Kane wasn't the forgiving type. Outside, Kane's voice rang out like a wolf in Sunday clothes. "Gideon Marsh, got something of mine. In that barn. I'd like it back." The women froze. "Property." That's what Kane had called them. Gideon's hand closed around the rifle. His fingers remembered its weight like a ghost from his old life. This time, though, he wouldn't run. Not with Sarah's daughter crying behind him. Not with these women marked like cattle. This time, Gideon Marsh stood his ground. Years spent living on the frontier began to stir inside him, instincts sharpened by survival. But before he could charge toward the door, Clarabelle's hand clamped around his arm. Her grip was firm, urgent. "He brought to men, both hired guns. You go out there swinging, and you'll get us all killed," she said, desperation lacing her voice. "Maybe if we go peacefully, he'll leave you out of it." "Not a chance," he snapped, his voice rougher than he meant it to be. 3 years of buried rage and fresh sorrow for the sister he'd lost bled into every syllable. "This is my land. You're my family. If Kane wants his damn debt, he can choke on it. Uncle Gideon." Mercy's voice, soft but steady, cut through the storm building inside him. "Before she died, Mama made me promise something too. She made me swear that if we ever found you, I wouldn't let you throw your life away on our account. She said you'd already given up more than enough." Outside, Kane's voice rang out. "I'm counting to 10, Marsh. Then I'm coming in to get what I'm owed." Gideon turned his gaze around the barn, taking in the faces of the women who'd come back into his life only to face this danger with him. As Kane's count rose, Gideon came to a realization he hadn't escaped violence 3 years ago. He'd only been bottling it up. 9, each number slammed into the air like the strike of a judge's gavel. Gideon moved toward the barn door, rifle ready, but Clarabelle stepped in his way. "There's something you don't know," she said quickly, a new urgency in her voice. "Why Sarah really died. Why she owed him that money." Gideon's finger hovered above the trigger. "What do you mean?" "The medicine. It wasn't for a fever," Mercy whispered, her tears catching the light. "Mama got sick because someone poisoned the well on our land. It made her sick. It made the neighbors sick too." 10. The barn door burst inward, splinters flying. As Kane's boot drove it open, he stepped through like a storm made flesh, flanked by 2 grim-faced men, guns ready. Up close, Kane was a mountain tall, broad, his hands scarred from countless fights, his presence heavy with menace. His eyes swept across the barn, pausing on each of the women like he was counting livestock. "Well, what do we have here?" "All. The runaways in one pen. Makes my work easier." His cold eyes landed on Gideon. "Gideon Marsh, right? Heard you went soft. Living out here like some half-dead hermit. But harboring stolen goods, that's still illegal." "They're not stolen," Gideon said, keeping his rifle steady. "They're my blood." Kane laughed, sharp and brittle like shattered ice. "Your blood owes me $300. With interest, that's $350. Considering the trouble they've caused, I'm being generous." He stepped forward, undeterred by the rifle, pointed at him. You pay what they owe, they stay. Otherwise, they come with me. And if I don't? Gideon asked, steel creeping into his voice. Then I take them anyway. And you get buried behind your house. Kane's smile stretched wide, all menace and teeth. Your move, hermit. Before Gideon could respond, Clarabelle pushed forward, defiance in every line of her stance. Tell him the rest, Kane. Tell him what really happened to that well. Kane's expression shifted, danger flashing in his eyes. Careful what you say, girl. Some truths get people killed. Clarabelle ignored the warning. You wanted Sarah's land. You knew there was silver under it. So you poisoned the well, got folks sick, then tried to buy them out cheap while they scrambled for medicine. The pieces slammed into place. In Gideon's mind, like a door being kicked open. You murdered my sister for a patch of dirt. Kane shrugged. It's just business. She was too proud to take the deal. Shame really. But don't worry, I'll take good care of these ladies, especially the little one. The way Kane's eyes lingered on Mercy made something snap in Gideon's chest. Rage, guilt, grief, all of it crystallized into perfect clarity. But before he could fire, one of Kane's men drew his pistol, fast as lightning. A shot rang out, loud as thunder in the barn. It wasn't Gideon who'd been hit. The gunman staggered, clutching a bleeding shoulder. Smoke curled from the tiny pistol held steady in the hands of an older woman. Silver streaks in her hair. Always carry insurance, she said grimly. My husband taught me that. Kane turned on her with a growl. You just signed your own death sentence, you old hag. That moment of distraction was all Gideon needed. He slammed the butt of his rifle into Kane's jaw, sending the giant of a man crashing against the barn wall. The last of Kane's men went for his gun. But Clarabelle was already there, swinging a metal milk pail like a weapon. It struck the man's temple with a crack and dropped him cold. Kane wiped blood from his lip and looked up at Gideon with something like new respect. Well, the hermit still has teeth. He rose slowly, hands lifted to show he wasn't going for a weapon. But his eyes were calculating. This doesn't fix anything, Marsh. You can't win. Not against the whole territory. Maybe not, Gideon said, rifle still leveled. But I can damn well win today. Kane's tone shifted, taking on a sinister calm. Kill me, and my friends will come after everyone you care about. But if you let me walk out of here, maybe we can find a way to settle this civilly. Gideon didn't lower the rifle. His jaw was clenched, his eyes hard. The fight wasn't over. But one thing was clear, he wasn't alone anymore. The expression on Kane's face was one of a man used to wriggling out of tight corners. I'm a businessman, not a killer, he said smoothly. You poisoned my sister, Gideon said, voice low, each syllable sharp with controlled fury. I gave her a choice. She didn't take it. Kane replied with a careless shrug. That's just how deals work. His gaze shifted, calm and cold. But that's all in the past. What I'm interested in is what comes next, your future. Mercy stepped up beside her uncle, her young face set with determination. He won't quit, Uncle Gideon. Men like him never do. Not until they get what they want or someone puts them down for good. Kane's eyes flicked to her, a hint of irritation crossing his face. Sharp little thing, isn't she? A shame. The world's going to knock that cleverness out of her sooner or later. His meaning wasn't lost on anyone. Gideon's hand tightened around the trigger of his rifle. But before he could act, Clarabelle gently touched his arm. There's another way, she said softly. Something Sarah told me before she died. She had documents proof that Kane's been buying up land with forged papers. The smugness on Kane's face vanished, and for the first time, fear crept into his eyes. Your sister was always too clever for her own good, he muttered. But the edge in his voice had dulled. Even if such papers existed, who's going to believe a dead woman and a group of desperate women? The territorial marshal might, said the woman with the derringer, steady as ever. Especially when he sees proof of how many you've swindled, how many wells you've fouled, how many graves your silver's paid for. Kane paused, eyes narrowing. He was thinking now, calculating the odds like a man sitting at a poker table with bad cards. Let's suppose these papers are real. Let's say you could cause me trouble. What do you want? Clarabelle stepped up, her voice steady, filled with quiet authority. The debt's gone, every cent. And you leave, for good. Kane hesitated. And if I don't? Gideon raised the rifle another inch. Then we find out just how tough you really are. But Kane was already moving, backing slowly toward the exit, his wounded men trailing behind. This isn't over, Marsh, he called out. You haven't. Juan, you've just bought time. The hoof beats of retreating horses faded into silence, and Gideon noticed he was trembling. The barn didn't feel the same anymore. It wasn't just a place for livestock, it was where his family had made a stand, side by side with him. He leaned the rifle against the wall and looked around at the women who'd re-entered his life, like they'd never left. The papers Sarah hid. He asked Clarabelle, "They're real?" She smiled and reached into her dress, pulling out a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. As real as morning light. Your sister was smarter than Kane ever knew. She documented everything fake. Land deeds, poisoned water, bribes, it's all in here. Mercy stepped closer, eyes wide as she examined the bundle. Mama never told me. She was protecting you, said another woman, her hair streaked with silver. Gideon recognized her now as Aunt Viola, his father's sister. Gone since the family tore itself apart. Sarah knew if Kane found out, he'd come after anyone who might know the truth. Pride swelled in Gideon's chest, mingling with grief. Even in her final days, Sarah had been thinking of those she loved. So what now? Clarabelle answered simply, now we live. We milk cows, tend the land. We build something worth keeping. You all want to stay? Gideon asked, surprised at the hope in his own voice. If you'll have us, Mercy replied. Her voice carried the fierce spirit of her mother, a refusal to be broken. We've all been scattered too long. It feels good to have a place again. Over the next hour, while they finished chores and locked the barn, Gideon listened to their stories. Clarabelle, scraping by as a seamstress, Viola, left with nothing after the old rancher she cared for passed. Each woman had been walking through life alone, holding onto fragments of the past like broken glass, but now walking back to the house together. Something had shifted. The man who had locked himself away for 3 years full of guilt, rage, and sorrow was gone. In his place stood someone ready to fight for something more than just survival. As they reached the porch, Clarabelle turned to him. You know he'll come back. Men like Kane don't forget. Let him, Gideon said, watching Mercy stroke the nose of a horse, her posture calm and strong. Next time, he won't find the same man waiting. That night, for the first time in years, his kitchen was alive with noise, dishes clinking, fire crackling, women's laughter echoing through the rooms. As Gideon stepped onto the porch to watch the sunset spill across his land, the ache in his chest softened. The house didn't feel hollow anymore. Inside, life was stirring again, not just the sound of survival, but of belonging. He thought of Sarah, of her trust in these women, and the promise they'd made her. Sometimes, the family you make is stronger than the one you're born into. Tomorrow would bring new troubles, new choices, but tonight, Gideon Marsh wasn't alone anymore.